Hi all, welcome back to another live session with Drawing Desk. Today we will be creating this beautiful scene with a winter house. If you have any requests for our next session, please let us know in the comments. Okay, let's get started. I'm opening Sketch Desk and creating a new canvas with my current screen size. And then I'm pinching that canvas so that I can see it fully on my screen. I am tapping this gradient bar on the left, choosing gradient colors, and up at the top we have two rectangles. So I'm tapping this first rectangle and setting it to a dark blue, and then tapping the second rectangle and setting it to a lighter blue. Then tap and drag from the top to the bottom of the screen, and we have a beautiful gradient. And this is going to be our sky, but I want to pinch it up a little bit, so I'm using the select tool, which is this square with 4 corners on the top, and then I'm using the freeform setting and just dragging it up to fill about 3/4 of my page. And then I'm just tapping the select tool again to close out of that. Down here on the bottom, I'm going to my layers menu and creating a new drawing layer. And this is going to be for our snow. But I want our snow to be not pure white, but just with a touch of pink to it. So I'm setting a very light pink shade, and then I'm using the marker to draw a wavy line across my page. And I am drawing down and filling this shape in completely. So I have a closed shape before I drag the color in. Tapping my layers menu, creating a new drawing layer, and this is going to be for our house. So I'm choosing a dark blue shade, a blue that is darker than our sky, and I'm going to use our Shapes tool to create the house. So tapping the Shapes tool icon and choosing the equilateral triangle, and then I'm adjusting the size of that and moving it to the center of my canvas, and I am using my marker at the smallest size to trace around it. Then I'm adjusting the size again so it is just a little bit smaller, and I'm moving that inside of my first triangle and tracing around again, tapping the X to close this menu, then dragging and dropping the color to fill in that shape. Creating another new layer, and this time it is going to be dragged behind our triangle layer. So this is going to be the wooden part of our house. I am selecting an orangey brown color and coloring in the area behind this triangle. So I'm actually making another triangle, holding my pencil down at the top to snap it into place. The shape is closed, so I can drag and drop my color in, and that fills in my full shape. Okay. Our next layer is for our framing areas of the house, so the area around the windows and around the door. Choosing a darker blue, even darker than the frame, and I'm increasing the size of my marker. And then I'm using the ruler tool to create some straight lines. So I'm rotating it as needed and creating the lines here at the top of my house for a window. So I've gone along the bottom, and then I'm just creating a cross right in the middle. And now I'm creating some lines on either side of the door. These are going to be holding up the second part of our roof, or like a little awning. And we're going to create that right now. So we are going to come back to this other layer, but for now, let's create a new layer. Bring it down below our big triangle, but keeping it above the framing that we just made. And I'm going to go back to my Shapes tool, scrolling down into the flowchart category, and this first shape is going to be perfect. So I'm selecting that, choosing an off-white color similar to our snow, and then using the marker, tracing around this shape, closing out my Shapes menu, filling in that shape, using the select tool to rotate it, and then keeping that under the freeform choice. Down at the bottom here, we can select freeform to really customize the shape of our roof here. Keeping that selected, I'm dragging it down where I want it to be on the house. I want it to be inside of this main frame, the big triangle, and I want it to be just under that little window we've created on top. So I'm just adjusting that until it's exactly how I want it. And I think that's perfect, so I'm closing out of my select, and now I am going to go back to this framing layer, the one that we were working on before. It has our window frames and our straight lines. I am choosing our dark blue again, and I'm going to make the door frame. So I'm going back to my Shapes tool, choosing the rectangle here under Chairs, and I am decreasing the size of that and bringing it down. And it's okay if it goes past the bottom of your house, because we are only going to trace the top half of, or the top section of this door, just like I'm doing here. Now creating a new layer for the light coming through the window and the doors. So I'm putting this in between the wood of the house and the frame layer. And then I am using a pale yellow to color in that little space behind the window and behind the door. Finally, the last thing for the house, I'm going back to that framing layer, the one with the straight lines, and I'm adding a small dark blue doorknob. All right, I'm going back to our snow, tapping the gear and decreasing the opacity. And then I am creating a second layer of snow, so a new drawing layer above everything else we've drawn so far. And this time I'm choosing bright, pure white, and drawing another wavy line, this time going a little bit over our house. And just like we did before, I am drawing down, filling in the sides and bottom of the shape before I drag and drop the color in. Then I am zooming in and using both the marker and the eraser to refine the shape of the snow until I am happy with how the whole thing looks. Okay, and now we are going to create our trees. So a new layer behind everything except for the sky. So behind all of our snow and all of our house layers. And then I'm choosing a gray toned purple, and then I'm selecting my triangle again using the Shapes menu, and I'm just creating it any size anywhere on the canvas, and then I'm going to use my Select and Freeform tool to create more of a narrow and long tree shape. And then I'm using my marker and adding some more details to each side of the tree. And you can hold your pencil down at the end of creating these angles, or you can just draw them freehand. I did a combination of both for my tree. And then I am just adding a wavy line across the bottom and filling in all of the extra shapes that I just added onto my tree. And what we're going to do is we're going to create just one tree and then use that tree for our entire forest. So we're going to spend a little more time on just this first tree, but we won't have to do it more than once. So now I'm going in with my eraser and just cleaning up any edges that I want to make a little sharper. And once I'm happy with the shape, I am selecting that layer and putting it right where I want on the edge of my canvas, adjusting the size, and then I am going to tap the gear of that layer, lock alpha, and this will make sure that we're only drawing inside the tree. And now I'm using the crayon at a medium opacity and a very dark purple shade, and I'm just starting to layer on some dark shadows to the bottom of this tree. Then I am adjusting the shade to a medium purple, and I am going over the center of the tree, overlapping where I've already colored with the darker purple. And then I am selecting a lighter purple and going over just the top. Now I am selecting the blending tool, is the third one up from the bottom, and I'm just blending these colors together a little bit. And finally, I'm choosing the airbrush and choosing a dark purple, almost black shade, and then going up and shading from the bottom of the tree towards the top, and I'm mostly focusing on the lower section of the tree. Now I'm continuing this airbrush step with different shades of purple as I feel like the tree needs. And every tree is going to be different. Your tree will not look exactly like this. That is the beauty of these brushes. The way that you're holding your pencil and the angle that you're holding your pencil will affect the way the color comes out. So I am using my pencil here on the side, and that really helps me get a nice light and even distribution of color. But they really do come out a bit differently each time I draw them, so it's part of the fun. I'm just adding some final shadows to the sections of the tree, sort of where these little branches are sticking out. Okay, and now we are ready to start making the rest of our forest using this tree. So I'm going to that layer, tapping the gear, and choosing Duplicate Layer. Then I'm using the Select tool to adjust the size and placement of each tree. And I'm just going to continue to repeat that across the whole canvas. I'm making the trees on the edges of the canvas bigger and the trees closer to the house smaller. And I am overlapping the trees with one another, so I am dragging the layers in front of and behind each other so that the smaller trees are in the back and the larger trees are towards the front. So I am just continuing to duplicate, select, and drag my trees around until I have my whole canvas filled across the page with a forest. And finally, I'm just making sure that all of the trees go down the page far enough so that they are covering up that translucent layer of snow. Okay, now we're going to create a second layer of trees. So making a new layer, but dragging it all the way behind all of our other tree layers. And then I'm going back to my Shapes tool, choosing my triangle, and drawing a triangle using a dark blue, almost black shade, dragging the color in to fill it, and then using my Select tool with the freeform setting to make that a narrow and thin triangle. And then just like we did before, tapping the gear of that layer, duplicating it, and dragging additional trees all across the back of our forest. And with that, our base layer is done, and we are ready to start adding some texture and shading to the rest of our drawing. So I'm going back to my house layers, tapping the gear of each layer, and choosing Lock Alpha for all of the house layers. Then I'm choosing a dark blue shade, my airbrush, and I have reduced the opacity down by sliding the little slider on the right side there to about halfway. And then once I've done the first layer, I'm increasing the opacity back up to 100% and adding a little more shading. Then I am choosing a brighter blue, a bright and light blue at a lower opacity, and I'm adding some highlight to the top of the house. Now I'm skipping over the awning, or that white trapezoid there, and I'm going to my framing layer, so it's the center of the window and the door frame. And then I'm using the bright blue at a low opacity to add some highlight to the center of the window. And I'm slowly increasing the opacity and adding some more brightness. Then I'm doing the same thing to the door frame. I am selecting a dark blue, almost black shade and the marker to add a little bit of shading to the bottom of my doorknob. And now we're going to the yellow layer, so it's the light behind the window and the door. I'm choosing a darker yellow or light orange shade and using the highlighter brush going along the left edges of the door and the window. Then I'm switching to my airbrush and adding some more shading to the edges of both shapes. Then I'm selecting a bright, almost pure white, and using that to add some highlights to the center of each light. And if you feel like you made it too bright, like I did, you can always go back and add some darker yellow-orange shadow back in. Okay, going to the wood layer of our house, I'm using my crayon and a darker orange shade to create some vertical, slightly wavy lines going down the house. Switching to the pencil and adding some more lines. Then I am choosing the blending tool, so the third one up from the bottom, and just blurring that out a bit. Then I'm going back to my marker and I am going to press and hold with a finger on that base layer, so like the lighter orange shade, and I'm just erasing some of those lines to make them thinner. Okay, now selecting a dark red shade and the airbrush, and I'm going to use that at the largest size along the bottom and edges of my house. I am mostly concentrating this color on the bottom of the house and continuing to increase the darkness and add more layers as I go. So I'm starting off with red and continuing to go until I'm using a dark brown, almost black shade, and I'm adding some shadow to the sections underneath the window and the awning as well. Next, I'm choosing a brighter and lighter orange shade, and I'm using the airbrush again to add some brightness and highlight to the center of the house. And finally, we are going to add some shadow to our snow. So I'm going to our snow layer. I'm choosing a light gray purple shade, and I'm using my airbrush at the largest size to gently add some shadow to the left side, corner, and bottom of the snow. And as I go, I am increasing the darkness of the color that I'm using and adding some additional shadows, layering them on until I am happy with how everything looks. Now, if you have not already done so, be sure to lock alpha that snow layer. And I have my airbrush set to the lowest opacity using a light orange shade and adding some brightness to the snow. Then I am increasing the darkness, the opacity, but decreasing the size of my brush and just adding a little more concentrated light right near the door there. And then I'm finally going back to my awning layer. So this is the last step. This is our second little section of our roof. And I'm adding some gray shadow to the bottom and some orange light to the top. Thank you so much for joining. If you liked the session, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Until next time, stay creative.